This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. Dispatches is also supported by the public affairs firm O'Donnell & Associates. For more information, check out o'donnellsolutions.com.
I hope, in fairness to me, because the last time I was on your show, you introed the segment with my stuttering and bumbling over my words, and so I hope you give me the same treatment this time for yourself.
Well, Loren, I'll say there's some expression that I can't remember about turnabout and fair play, but I'll also say that I, at the end of the day, control the edit, so we'll see what happens.
I think I made a grave mistake.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out, and he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a podcast about power and politics in New York. And on today's episode, we're giving you a smorgasbord of reactions from Democratic voices weighing in on the election results here in the Empire State. And later in the program, we'll check in with Long Island Assemblymember Chuck Lavine about the GOP's strong performance on his home county of Nassau County. And we'll also hear from former Hochul advisor Bryan Lesswing about the state Democratic infrastructure, as well as the future relationship between the governor and New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani. But first, we're joined by elections nerd Loren Amor, a senior vice president with the communications firm BerlinRosen, who in a previous life was a political operative running the show for the New York State Democratic Campaign Committee. Well, back in those days of working on campaigns, what does the day following Election Day look like? Is it some sort of immediate post-mortem? Are you going around picking up lawn signs from right-of-ways? What does that following day look like, win or lose?
All of the above. I've definitely spent early mornings post-election day picking up lawn signs. When I worked on Congresswoman Grace Meng's first campaign for in 2012, the day after she won, she went out to a subway station and thanked voters. And I thought that was a great way to kick off Election Day and showed a lot of perseverance and tenacity on her part. So there's different ways to take in post-election day. Oftentimes you're up very late into the night, depending on how things go, or maybe no matter how things go. And so you try to sleep in. But I do remember the morning after the first Trump election in 2016, I remember getting to work right away because I thought it just seemed like it was pressing. But usually you try to get a little bit of sleep.
Well, let's talk about the results, and I'm generally loath to read too much into the early voting turnout, but our mutual friend Alex Almazri came on here recently and basically said the number of votes and who was voting was likely a good indicator for Democrats, and this was beyond just New York City. He was also looking at the Hudson Valley, and he appears to be right, with the GOP losing control of the Dutchess County legislature and seeing their majority shrink with the Orange County legislature. In hindsight, whether it was early voting or some other indicators, how much of these recent election results could have been forecasted with some degree of accuracy, and how much of this was going to be a surprise based on that Election Day turnout?
It's hard to match Alex's precinct by precinct granular knowledge of New York State election trends, so I won't try. Although I did listen to his segment with you as a little bit of homework before coming on today. I do think early vote matters. I think you saw it matter a lot in New York City, where especially over the weekend there was a huge surge in younger voters. I think there was a little bit of false hope for the Cuomo campaign in the early days of early voting, where the electorate seemed a little bit older, but that kind of quickly shifted. The key are the parties or the campaigns getting people out who wouldn't normally otherwise vote on Election Day, and are they banking votes that wouldn't have just been there for them anyway? That does seem to have been the case around the state. I mean, you saw super high turnout, early turnout, and Election Day turnout north of New York City. Nassau County, there was a more complicated and more Republican-leaning early turnout picture, and I think that was borne out in the results. So I do think early voting turnout, it doesn't tell you everything, but it is indicative of trends.
Well, I have to say, early voting was the only metric I had to use to assess the Saratoga Springs city council races late into the evening because the Board of Elections was just taking forever there, and I successfully predicted every single seat there just based on the early vote totals and the assumption that if Democrats were like neck and neck with Republicans, they were going to cede that lead once the election day votes were counted. But I'm really interested in Nassau County because you mentioned it, and I spoke with Assemblymember Chuck Lavine, and listeners are going to hear that later. And the gist of his point was Nassau County was unique. The trends we saw everywhere else, all the good news, it just couldn't happen in Nassau County because the Republican establishment is just too good. What do you think of that argument versus the idea that the Democratic offense was not very good in Nassau County?
I do think Nassau County was unique on election day. The results bear that out. Democrats had really strong performances north of the city. Democrats did pretty well in Suffolk County. Mm-hmm. Nassau County was an outlier. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I mean, sure, the Republican establishment is well entrenched. You have a sitting county executive. I think it's hard to beat a sitting executive. You know, executives, unlike legislators, can, and even though Bruce Blakeman is a deeply partisan figure, can still sort of have crossover appeal in a way that legislators don't. And you saw that in Orange County as well with Steve Newhouse, winning by a sizable margin, even as his party lost a number of seats in the county legislature. Some of it is infrastructure and structural. Some of it is just the electorate in Nassau County has dramatically changed in the last decade and has taken a far right turn in the Trump era. And I don't know how much a campaign can really affect that at the end of the day. I mean, I think, one theory could be that Nassau County, and I guess you could point to Westchester as a counterfactual here, but Nassau County is so close in proximity to New York City and, takes in the New York City media as its own news. And a lot of folks commute into the city from Nassau County. And so while I think there's a lot of hyperbole and it's kind of overblown, this theory that I saw, our friend Mike Lawler talking about how Zohran Mamdani will be on the ballot. I think that's pretty overblown. But I do think what happens in New York City does have a major and disproportionate impact on Nassau County elections as well. And so I think the electorate has moved far right. Independents in Nassau County no longer function as independents, but are functionally Republicans in their voting patterns. And from what I've heard from people on the ground, the Democrats were trying to turn out presidential year only voters who don't otherwise vote in off years, and were successful. Turned out about 20,000 new voters that they didn't otherwise expect to come out, and it didn't matter because the Republicans and the independents went against them. So I think there's something unique in the water in Nassau County, and they have bought into, a lot of the voters there, especially in off-year elections, have bought into the Trump agenda, and it's going to be tough for Democrats to claw their way back. Although I do think in an even year, you'll see more turnout from traditional Democratic-based communities that should help.
Well, did they make a mistake, and they being the Nassau County Democrats, by holding Zohran Mamdani not just at arm's length, but trying to punch him in the face? Because you talk about inroads that Republicans made on Long Island and in Nassau County specifically. Republicans made a lot of inroads in 2024 in New York City, and we saw Zohran Mamdani perform very well by bringing out a different electorate and appealing to some of those Trump voters who maybe aren't consistently voting in elections or maybe voted Democratic in the past. So from that perspective, both in terms of 2025 and maybe the future, should Nassau County Democrats be leaning more into Zohran Mamdani and his populist message, as opposed to what we see from someone like Congressman Tom Suozzi or the head of the state Democratic Party, Jay Jacobs, go in the other direction?
So you're 100% right that Mamdani clawed back some of the gains that Trump and Republicans had made with Latino voters, with Asian American voters. I have no idea, and it's impossible to tell how much Trump to Mamdani crossover there was versus he turned out different voters within those populations. So it's hard to kind of draw conclusions there. The Democratic brand, as damaged as it might be nationally, one thing we as a party have going for us is that we do allow our candidates to get to put some daylight between them and the national brand and run local campaigns focused on local issues. And so you saw that with Michael Cashman's win in North Country in the Assembly special election. So I think it's less about should we follow Zohran Mamdani's example or should we follow this candidate's example, and more about what does the best Democratic candidate look like for Nassau County and for the districts that they're trying to run in. And I don't know if we've really found the answer yet. I think there's a lot of soul searching to be done there. Certainly figuring out ways to engage more with communities of color and increase turnout in Black and Latino communities throughout Nassau County is something that I know that there's been work done there, but there I'm sure needs to be more done. And it's figuring out like what is the set of issues that Democrats can use as a wedge to kind of peel off Republican support. I saw some reporting in Newsday talking to voters at the polls who basically said, well, we'd love to have lower taxes, but don't really expect that to come anytime soon. But, for the meantime, I'm concerned about crime and immigration and rattled off all of these sort of national, issues that Republicans tend to have a bit of an advantage on. And if taxes and if your taxes going up don't matter in Nassau County, it's hard to craft the winning message there. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to figure out what the next wave of candidates should look like.
Is there anything that you look at the New York City mayor's race then and think could be replicable elsewhere? Because my concern for Democrats who say, well, he connected with people on social media, so we need to use social media more, or he connected with South Asian voters and we need to tap into them by running South Asian candidates. My concern for them would be that while imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, if you're insincere or not good with your imitation, then you're not going to connect with voters. So what do you think is some of the messages from this mayor's race that Democrats can use in the future?
I think turnout was great, and I think that what Mamdani was able to do to engage untouched parts of the electorate who felt disconnected from the political process and then felt motivated to come out and vote. And there was a story in the New York Times about how he ran an anti-loneliness campaign, which I found really compelling, basically getting Gen Zers who are living through their phones and their computers to leave the house and go to rallies and go canvass and go vote.
I thought you were going to say he was tapping into incels or something based on the anti-loneliness, but okay.
No,
that's
I think another party has kind of taken that lane a little more effectively. The campaign he ran was remarkable, but also to your point, we have to caution candidates that it was completely unique to him and to his own appeal and his own brand that he built. The lessons that we can draw are the consistency of his message was absolutely incredible, and the discipline he used to just pivot back to affordability at every opportunity, figuring out what the winning message is, and then not getting distracted by what your opponents are throwing at you, and being able to hammer that home and convey it like a normal person and in a relatable way, and communicate not as if you are speaking from talking points that were turned out from a focus group. I always worry every time we have a successful Democratic election that we tend to grab for tactics and try to, now it's social media, right? Oh, every candidate under the sun is going to start doing more TikTok videos, right? And think that is the recipe for success. I think we need to be careful there about what the approach is, how fluent you are with that technology. I mean, Zohran is a natural, at the 30-second direct to camera interview, but certainly pumping out constant streams of content, being unafraid to make mistakes and do long form podcast interviews, like not worrying about gaffes. And I hate to say it, but Trump is another example of this, right? He, in his presidential campaign in 2024, he was everywhere and he was talking to whoever wanted to talk to him and saying whatever he wanted to say and, just powering through the gaffes. And I think Mamdani was able to do that too. He just showed up and that matters to voters.
Wasn't worried about how much he could bench press either.
No, and then went on, I forget the name of that podcast, but he went on a comedy podcast and made fun of himself for that. And then look, I think that was something that you saw in the race that is maybe underreported. Mamdani was willing to admit mistakes and was willing to walk back positions. He walked back his previous statements on policing. He walked back previous positions on private development of housing. And when you look at the Cuomo campaign, there's a laundry list of things that I think New Yorkers had taken issue with in terms of his record and his history, and he just ignored it and didn't try to walk back anything or show introspection or contrition for anything.
Leading up to this election and now in its aftermath, some of the Democrats looking to oust longtime incumbents like State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli and Governor Kathy Hochul, that there is a surge represented by Assemblymember Zohran Mamdani within the Democratic Party that is a challenge to the status quo. And I am skeptical of the idea that they are able to harness that surge, or that the surge cares particularly about their races. What do you make of the attention that they're focusing on Zohran Mamdani's big win in the New York City mayor primary and then general election?
If you're an insurgent candidate who's looking to run for office in the near future, I think you have to take this and draw some hope from it, because otherwise, if you're not, then what are you doing? Having said that, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I really believe that every election is different. Every candidate is unique. I mean, this happened when Barack Obama won in 2008, right? A million copycat candidates who came out and tried to capture the same essence that he had captured. And, the truth was that he was just a unique figure, probably the most talented politician of our generation. And so you can't take that, bottle that magic and then just give it to any candidate and try to repeat that playbook, which gets back to the point of candidates figuring out what is authentic to them, what do they bring to the table that others don't, and then elevating and amplifying those strengths rather than trying to copy someone else. But I'm sure that, every candidate out there who's looking to run is going to see what they can glean from this and take that lesson with them.
What, if anything, from Tuesday's election results are an indicator of what to expect in 2026 when it comes to state races in particular? Are you looking at the suburbs more than, say, the New York City results? Are you looking at the 115th Assembly District, because that's a state race? Where do your eyes go?
First of all, if as kind of an elections nerd, as you characterized me in the beginning of the segment, I'm going to look at who are all these new voters that came out in New York City, especially if I'm, Kathy Hochul running statewide, the other statewide candidates. Mm-hmm. I want to look at all these new voters who came out in New York City, see their voting history, and if they haven't voted in a midterm before, those are going to be my first targets, and making sure that they got to vote and turn out and keep this momentum going with this incredibly high turnout. And I think that's both, New York City, but also in the northern suburbs and upstate New York, where we saw high turnout as well. So that Democratic turnout in an off year is really encouraging. I think the results where you see places that were previous swing areas like Monroe County, Dutchess County going pretty uniformly blue is really encouraging for a Democrat running statewide. There's certainly, there's certainly challenges to be had on Long Island, and it's a big voting block and a big population that needs to be figured out, and will certainly play a role in some competitive congressional races. But if I'm running statewide, or if I'm looking to hold my state Senate or state assembly majority, I'm feeling encouraged, and also want to dig into the data now and figure out how to make sure the electorate next year continues to build on this momentum.
For more than 100 years, the New York State Association of Counties has served as the united voice of New York's county leaders, fostering excellence in county government and advocating for sustainable funding and sensible legislation that protects local taxpayers and the essential services they rely on. Learn more at nysac.org. Do you think that the New York City mayor, if he is pushing for tax increases in a way that we did not see the last 4 years with New York City Mayor Eric Adams, that this is going to embolden the Democrats in the state legislature who have already been pushing this and have been successful in getting what I'll call token support for tax increases in their one-house budgets, but not necessarily translating to a knockdown, drag-em-out fight for tax increases. So in that way, do you think he's going to influence the legislative process?
Well, to fund his priorities, you're going to need a lot of money, and I would assume, because he said it on the campaign, that he has the same idea as you about how to fund those priorities, right? And they'll be taxing the wealthiest corporations, the wealthiest individuals in the state. And obviously, the governor has been more reluctant to do that in her term. We've seen a version of this play out before in 2014 when Bill de Blasio wanted to fund universal pre-K, and then Governor Cuomo refused to raise taxes to do it, but then went and found some money in the state budget to fund it in different ways. I think the outcomes are going to matter as much as how you get there. And so if Mamdani wants to do something major and landmark on childcare, for example, which it sounds like the Governor Hochul also does, how do they find a way to fund that and get to that result? Yeah, I imagine that the legislature will continue to push for tax increases on the rich. I think
Will they push more than in the past? Because they've pushed, but not necessarily with a lot of convincing energy, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I don't know. You and I have always disagreed on the value of one houses. I think they're actually important documents. But
sure, except when they negotiate in private, it doesn't seem to get enacted, and no one is saying, "Hey, I'm drawing a line in the sand on this issue."
But, I don't know. I don't know the answer because it's going to depend on what the revenue projections look like and what the gap is that they need to fill.
They're
during
bad,
COVID,
and the gap is getting worse.
Yeah, and during COVID, when there was a fiscal emergency, the governor and the legislature raised taxes on the rich to help fill that budget deficit. That is like one way to get there, and we'll see what happens. But I think there'll be an extra push because the mayor is going to be pushing for it, and we'll have a lot of allies in the state legislature. And I think the fiscal situation is going to be even more, or just dire and more dire than it has been in the past. So there will certainly be a push behind it. Who knows what will happen at the end?
So here's a line I got in an email after the election from the Broome County Republicans. It's about the incumbent Republican mayor in Binghamton winning re-election Tuesday night over, quote, Zohran Mamdani ally Myles Burnett. And one, I don't know whether Myles Burnett and Zohran Mamdani have ever met or talked. And two, it's interesting to me that Binghamton does have a Democratic enrollment edge over Republicans. So, one, what do you make of that victory more broadly? And two, we're already seeing the linkage between Zohran Mamdani and Democrats as far away as Binghamton. How successful is that going to be in terms of an albatross around Democrats' neck in 2026?
Yeah, on the Binghamton mayor's race, I know Binghamton's had a Republican mayor for a while, and you also saw in Broome County Nick Libis, who is the son of former Republican Senator Tom Libis, but ran as a Democrat, win countywide. So some mixed results in Broome County, but I can certainly predict with great confidence that the Republican Party will make Zohran Mamdani the boogeyman of next year's elections, and will put him on mailers and TV ads from everywhere from Ronkonkoma to Rochester.
Have you used that one before?
No. That was off the top of the dome.
That was impressive.
I'm old enough to remember when Republicans did the same thing with Bill de Blasio, and they did it in 2014, and they had great success because 2014 was a wave Republican year, and we probably would have lost all those races no matter what. And then they've tried it again in the following cycles, and it wasn't as successful because those were either more mixed years or a Democratic wave in 2018. So my working theory right now is I do think that using the mayor as a kind of a political football will work in some specific places. I think Nassau County is one of them, perhaps Rockland County. But I think the further you get away from the city, the less relevant it becomes, and the focus is going to be on who the local candidates are, what the races are that they're running. And I don't think it will really be as much of a factor as the Republican Party would like it to be.
So there are a lot of other outcomes from election night that we did not get to, whether it's Prop 1 dealing with land in the Adirondacks narrowly passing, or New York City voters aligning with journalists like myself who don't want to see the odd year elections go away, and they shot down Prop 6 there. Ulster County strengthened their super majority in Albany, Syracuse, Buffalo, Rochester. The Democratic mayoral candidates, as expected, won. In the city of Rensselaer, the mayor ownership flipped from red to blue. A lot out there. Anything else, maybe something I just mentioned or something else that you're looking at that you think is particularly meaningful, either in terms of an indicator of what to expect in the future or an example of something that Democrats should try to replicate?
I have to make a shameless plug for Props 2 through 5 in New York City, which our team here worked very hard with coalition members to help pass. I guess if you have to characterize my politics, I'm sort of in that weird abundance world, especially when it comes to housing.
Yeah,
so
you're giving Ezra Klein right now.
I'm giving Ezra Klein. So I hope that I hope that other localities look to build more housing, because I think it's a good thing and will lower costs and make life more affordable. In terms of like other big takeaways, I think Republicans are really struggling to figure out what their identity is when Trump is not on the ballot, and that will play a factor in the midterms. and potentially in the 2028, depending on whether or not he's on the ballot.
It's like the reverse of Barack Obama 10, 15 years ago.
We have become the party that excels in low turnout elections, and the Republicans are doing better in presidential years. It's completely upended the model that I think we all sort of built our worldviews and political analysis on over the last 2 decades. So I think that's a challenge for Republicans in the short term, and then also just, a challenge for both parties when it comes to picking a president the next round or a presidential candidate the next round. Assuming Trump doesn't subvert the Constitution, the Republicans figure out what their party looks like with, a J.D. Vance or a Marco Rubio, who I just frankly don't think have the juice. And then the Democrats will kind of have to figure out how to recapture some of that magic that Barack Obama and others had in terms of turning out new voters.
Well, we've been speaking with Loren Amor. He is a senior vice president with the communications firm BerlinRosen. Loren, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Always good to see you.
And now we're going to check in with Assemblymember Chuck Lavine, a Long Island Democrat who has spent more than 20 years in Nassau County elected politics. In some New York City suburbs on election night, Democrats made inroads into GOP control and in some cases flipped control outright of county legislatures and even had some historic county-wide wins. But in your neck of the woods in Nassau County, Republicans won all 4 county-wide seats and kept control of the county legislature. What do you make of your party's performance in Nassau County?
First, just a general gut reaction, which is ouch. But secondly, it's no surprise. Nassau County is and has been controlled by the Republican Party, one of the strongest Republican parties in the entire United States of America, for over a century. And while we make inroads from time to time, the fact of the matter is that we are outspent dramatically.
You had a Democratic county executive a few years ago.
We had 2, and before that we had 1. The first one was Judge Eugene Nickerson, who was a great, great guy. And then we had Tom Suozzi and Laura Curran. So the tide does change from time to time. But I don't think we use Nassau County as a bellwether in terms of determining the relative strength of the political parties. I think that what we do this year is we have to look even at Suffolk County, where Democrats made inroads, and throughout the state of New York, Onondaga County, for example, we made big changes, and throughout the United States. And this is a reaction. This is a reaction to what we were talking about when we spoke about the selective prosecutions inspired by President Trump. Americans, to the tune of over 60%, I believe the last figures I saw were 62% of the American people have lost faith in Donald J. Trump. The economy, the tariffs, people starving, people not being paid, layoffs, the government shut down. People are frightened, and I think that was reflected in the votes out in the United States in general. And in time, we may be able to make some inroads in Nassau County, but I don't think we use Nassau County as the North Star of our political future.
But why would Nassau County be immune from those larger trends, if not because of, say, a lackluster slate of either candidates or lackluster messaging? I mean, is it really just that the Republican apparatus is that much stronger there compared to other counties like Orange County, where Democrats made inroads, Dutchess County, where Democrats flipped the legislature, or just nearby in Suffolk County?
Those of us who live in Nassau County who are Democrats are in the proverbial belly of the beast. And it's going to take a lot of work for us to be able to change that paradigm. But the day will come. I'm very proud of the Democrats who ran for office in Nassau County, not only on the county level, but on the town levels and on the 2 city levels. We had a very good slate of candidates, people with a lot of promise, and a lot of young people as well. So even though I may no longer be chronologically young, I hope I'm still young at heart. And I'm very, very proud of everyone who ran as a Democrat in Nassau County.
And now we're going to hear from Bryan Lesswing, a former advisor to Governor Kathy Hochul, who is now head of the Albany operations for the communications firm SKDK.
The one thing I do actually warn, though, a cautionary thing, is actually the money front and the fundraising front. What I've argued for a while is that Republicans, the playbook is pretty much the same across the country when it comes to paid media in elections. It's a money dump, massive money dump in the last few weeks, always outspending the Democratic candidates as much as possible. That's what happens in the 2022 race. Pro-Zeldin or Zeldin spent between 12 to 17 million more dollars in the last few weeks of the cycle compared to the Hochul campaign. We're going to see that playbook again. The money wave is going to be coming from New York again next year, and we should all be ready for it.
So as a communications professional, what are the right lessons and what are the wrong lessons to take away from Assemblymember Zohran Mamdani, now New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani's primary win, and then the ability to turn out a record number of people in a general election as well?
Well, I think the right lessons, he met voters where they were. One of his early activities that really helped him build some buzz and momentum was just being on a street corner, interviewing people, interviewing them about what they care about.
You don't think that's a unique skill set, though? Because I know there are a lot of politicians who, if you sent them on that street corner, it would be pretty awkward.
Yeah. I think that's a fair knock.
But it seems like then the lesson is, if that's your strength, lean into it. Yeah. If that's not your strength, what do? Do you just not run?
No, I think that the point is that if you want to win, you need to meet voters where they are. You need to talk to them. You need to communicate with them. And I think it's a fair knock on Democratic candidates, and the party in general has been pretty safe and too careful on that front. And that's just not me in the moment of where people are at right now. So, and it obviously helped build a reputation and a brand of just being a very accessible person, who talks about the issues they care about and is likable and impersonable. I will say on last night's speech, which I thought was a very aspirational victory speech, but I also thought it was very interesting. Just if you want to forecast session next year, and kind of everybody's very interested right now in the governor and mayor-elect dynamics and how this is going to work out. I thought it was interesting that he really leaned into universal child care, freeze the rent, which is something that he can do on his own, and making buses free and faster. The governor's already been pretty out there talking about how she wants to work on this issue with Mamdani. So I think they will work to try to find a solution, as well as free and fair buses. I'm sure there's common ground that they can meet when it comes to transportation. We'll see.
When you say common ground on child care and transportation, what I'm hearing is a different C word, compromise. Do you think that Mayor-elect Mamdani is going to want to compromise, or is it the case that this governor is going to have to compromise on some of the positions she's had, such as, I'm not going to increase taxes on the wealthy? Yeah,
she's been pretty fervent about that and has made it very clear that is her position. I will say that I've noticed recently that Mayor-elect Mamdani has seemed, I think I read the Times this morning, that he's actually open to discussing with her other funding mechanisms for how to get there on a lot of his priorities. Again,
what does that look like? A new corporate tax, potentially?
I'm not the budget director. I'm not Blake Washington. He's the man.
From a messaging point, is there another tax that you think makes sense for Democratic candidates to lean into?
I'm not an expert on it. What I will say is just they both work for each other.
You're going to have to sell me on this one, because I don't know if I agree.
Well, I think in a way, like he needs some short-term wins here. The conversation, this is the day after the election. Already this morning there are op-eds and there are headlines about the massive expectations that Mamdani has now. So he needs to get some wins on the board pretty soon here, certainly within the first year or two as part of his term. He's going to need the governor to get those wins.
Well, he could also rally the legislature to help him deliver those wins. He could use the legislature to potentially put the governor in a position where she's going to have to compromise on some of her values. So I don't necessarily think she needs to negotiate directly with the governor.
Yeah, sure. But my point, I mean, the buck stops with the governor. So
sure.
But I guess my point is that he's going to need some wins. It goes through her.
But you said he could freeze the rent on his own.
Of course. But also, again, like last night's speech, he really concentrated on three things: freeze the rent, universal child care, and buses. So that's kind of where he needs her. She needs his, support and obviously his supporters to make for a smooth and easy primary and general next year in terms of running up, your numbers. And again, it's going to be certainly a Republican messaging point. It's going to be their playbook to, as you said, turn Mamdani into the next, say Pelosi or AOC. But it's just kind of, I think, again, looking at last night's results, it's a little deaf.
Yeah, and I'm old enough to remember when the boogeyman was Shelley Silver. So it doesn't matter kind of how far to the left you are. They're just going to grab whoever it is in power and just vilify that person. What about the state party itself, though? Because it seems like it's at kind of an inflection point, given the fact that there was a serious schism between the chair and the de facto leader, Governor Hochul, over this New York City mayor's race. And in the chair's backyard, Nassau County, the Democrats did very badly compared to how Democrats were doing around the state. So does the party itself need to do some soul searching, especially as it gears up for 2026, because it seemed like the infrastructure, all the apparatus that was tuned up for 2024 was put to bed, sent into a medically induced coma during 2025, and was not necessarily deployed in the same way.
Yeah. My view has always been that the party is the governor's party.
Sure.
And we saw last year, the governor stood up a fantastic coordinated campaign through the party to help candidates up and down the ballot. Other than raising money, that organizing is the function and the strength of the party, and I think that's where that's where it's best used. Obviously, there's palace intrigue with the chair and between the governor that makes for interesting fodder. But at the end of the day, it's an organizing body. It raises money, and the governor's already shown that she can wield that effectively.
Sure, but there was no, sticking to the substance, deployment of that infrastructure in 2025. It seemed like the Democrats won in some places almost despite of what was happening with the party apparatus.
Yeah, sure. But I think...
Isn't that an indictment then of the party leadership?
No. No? I think, again, like she stood up a very, very successful coordinator for 2024. We'll see the same in 2026. And that's going to be where, Democrats made gains yesterday, and they're going to continue to make more next year.
But why overlook an off-year election? Isn't that the lesson that Democrats were supposed to have learned in 2010 when they were anticipating just that Obama wave to keep going? And then they said, oh, but you know what? We are going to take a 50-state solution in the aftermath of 2010. We're going to rebuild the bench. And now we're talking about how the Democrats didn't do that in 2025. They're going to break it out for even years only, which, I guess that works in the future if they change all the election dates. But it seems like the same mistakes as the past.
I appreciate what you're saying. But again, my argument would be Democrats performed well yesterday, and with a coordinated campaign, with a strong party, or organizing, or component of the party and fundraising, we're going to continue making gains next year.
When do you see, if he does at all, the New York City mayor-elect endorsing Governor Kathy Hochul? Because it seems she's going to want it to happen during the primary if it happens at all. So there is a clock ticking on that.
Yeah, I think just when it strategically makes most sense. I can't even forecast when that would be.
And at this point, as you look at the landscape, do you see any other Democratic challengers potentially emerging to take on Governor Kathy Hochul? Right now we have the, I'll say, struggling campaign from her number 2, Antonio Delgado. But is there anyone else that you would keep an eye on? And is there any reason why Zohran Mamdani might want to rally that person, potentially as a partner in 2027 and beyond, or maybe more in the short term as a form of leverage against the governor?
As I said earlier, I don't think they're looking to go to war here, particularly going into an election cycle. Neither one is looking to do that. In terms of other challengers, I have not heard peep about any other challengers, and frankly, I think it's just a testament to, as someone who formerly worked for the governor, I think she is a very savvy tactician that doesn't get enough credit for it, but she has effectively cleared the field.
And in terms of this party apparatus that's been built up by the New York City mayor-elect, how do Democrats actually tap into that? Because there are some major concerns that group has either with the Democratic Party or they just don't care about politics outside of this New York City mayor's race. So how do Democrats rally that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the components for the mayor-elect's success is being able to identify and turn out new voters and turn out, a volunteer army that is just second to none. So the question is going to be how do you continue that enthusiasm going into the next cycle?
Because you can't just hand the keys over to the governor and say, hey, watch it around turns. This Corvette really hums because the car might not run if she tries to turn it on.
No, I agree. I think so far the dynamic between the mayor-elect and the governor has been positive. I think they both want to keep it that way. And, of course, that enthusiasm will be helpful for next year.
Is there a potential breaking point for that relationship when you look ahead? Because obviously right now they both see a benefit in playing nice with each other and, like you said, trying to find that common ground. But if, as you said, the mayor-elect needs wins, the governor staked out certain positions, and she has her own general election in the fall, is there a point where if they can't get one thing or another, that the thing falls apart?
Truthfully, maybe after next year. Right now they both benefit from that, the dynamic, and it's just very clear that they're both, not necessarily trying to be going to war with each other immediately. And frankly, I will say this too, we've seen this with other personalities in the New York scene. The governor has never approached working with government partners in an adversarial or in a way of I need to one up this person.
Can I introduce you to State Senator James Skoufis from the Orange County?
Right. Okay, but I will say, she did not take that tact with Mayor Adams.
Nope. Even when he was facing federal indictment.
Yeah, right. And frankly, people were reassured to know that dynamic was in place, and I think that is how she works. She wants to, at the end of the day, get wins, make progress, and doesn't let ego and personality get in the way of that.
And that's all the analysis and insights fit for this episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany. If you enjoy the show, leave us a rating and review wherever you get it. It helps other political nerds find the podcast and really does wonders for my self-esteem. Until next time, podcast adjourned.